Language interpreter today is Vero. You can choose to listen to this webinar in Spanish by selecting the globe icon and selecting interpretation. Puede optar por escuchar este seminario en español, seleccionado el icono del globo y seleccionado interpretación. Please note that closed captioning is also available. To activate this, please select the closed caption button found at the bottom of your screen. This session is being live streamed and will be posted on ACLU's social channels in both English and Spanish, and this meeting is being recorded. For the question and answer portion of our talk today, we intend to have several minutes for question and answer. Please use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. We encourage questions, and you can direct those to any or all of our panelists here today. We will do our best to answer your questions during that portion of our conversation, and if we can't get to your question, we'll be sharing our contact information and ways to get in touch with the ACLU of Connecticut at the end of the discussion. You can also sign up for updates from our offices on our website at ACLU-CT.org, and we encourage you to follow and interact with us on our social media channels on all platforms. We are at ACLU-CT on every platform, and with that, let's get started. You are welcome here. We are excited to hear from you about the issues that you care about the most. Our team is here to talk with you about our work and to answer your questions to the best of our ability. The theme of these town halls, which we are hosting all over the state for the next several weeks and months, is strength in building collective power. Our policy and legal experts will talk about specific issues and have time for questions, but there are many things that we don't know about what exactly will happen in the near future. We have a preview of what civil rights and liberties in a second Trump administration, what they've promised, and your ACLU is planning accordingly. The most important takeaway from this town hall is that we are here, that you are here, and that we are all here together. Our team will talk about this more during our presentation, but this is a time where we all must show up for one another. If you are here, you are showing up for your families, for your friends, and for your communities. Many people have asked us what to do because you all understandably want to do something. Being here at this town hall is you doing something. Listening, learning, taking action on what we talk about here today, that is doing something. There will be much more to do, and I'll talk to you more about how you can support our work and keep up with our accurate information just before we take questions. But being here today is a wonderful start. Showing up and making meaningful contributions will be increasingly important as we move into 2025 and beyond. As we get started, it's important that you understand how the ACLU works and the ACLU of Connecticut works. We have teams that work together to advocate for your civil rights and liberties in the courthouse, the state house, the governor's mansion, with other organizations in communities like this one here today, and in the streets. Our values lead our mission-based work to advance civil rights and liberties in the state, and with ACLU all across the nation. Our values are anti-racism, equity, dignity, diversity, inclusivity, and centering the people who are most impacted by civil liberties violations and injustice. We hope that you can see our values in every facet of our work. I am the ACLU of Connecticut's Director of Communications, and you will hear from our Executive Director, our Public Policy and Advocacy Director, and our Legal Director, who will introduce themselves as we go along and talk about their teams and their work. We are also supported today by our development team. I'll be asking our panel some questions, and then you will have the opportunity to ask questions of your own. We're going to move quickly in our presentation so we can get to your questions, and we hope to allow plenty of time to delve deeper into what you're most interested in. Let's hear first from our Executive Director, David McGuire. David, what are we facing? Are we ready for what's coming?
Thanks for teeing us up, B. We're absolutely ready for it. And to be blunt and right to the point, we're facing some monumental challenges, both as a state and as a country. It's going to be absolutely critical that civil society and organizations like ours hold the line and demand that civil rights and civil liberties remain a priority over the next 4 years. We're really not trying to fearmonger, but it's important that we all take Donald Trump at his word. He has a plan, and we have a response. We know that the second Trump administration promises to be a more cruel, inhumane, and one that is even more dismissive of democracy than the first. And that is a very scary thing, but we have a plan and we're seeing people mobilize. seeing the folks on this call today is a great sign of that. People are jumping into action. And that is a good and a huge reason for hope. We're meeting people across the state, like you all today, and we see a very powerful and strong resistance building. That resistance is going to be absolutely necessary over the next 4 years, and we're ready. This is not our first battle in this either. You all and the ACLU have done this before. We did a really effective job of stifling the Trump 1.0 agenda, and we're ready for what lies ahead.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about that, David? What has the ACLU done specifically to prepare for this moment?
Lots and lots of very intentional planning. We've been planning really since the spring of this year. I want to give our team and our board a tremendous amount of credit for really gaming out multiple scenarios. We're really meant for moments like this, and our planning has showed that. Both the National ACLU, who we work closely with, and our staff have done really in-depth planning starting, really in September when the National ACLU released 13 public memos that laid out the challenges of a potential Trump or Harris administration. And these are really detailed memos that went subject matter by subject matter and listed detailed threats as well as the legal, legislative, and advocacy responses we could take at the federal and state level. We then, as an affiliate, took it to the next level and put together our own memo called the Connecticut Memo, which is a detailed memo that not only put in place safeguards for the election, which thankfully went well here in Connecticut, but also outlined the various scenarios that could impact Connecticut here. We know the playbook. That's the benefit that we have this time. Last time there was a lot of unknown, but now we know Trump will be using the Project 25 playbook. As much as he said on the campaign trail that he was not part of that memo, he very much was. And as you can see, his members streaming into his administration, these are people that have fingerprints all over Project 2025. So we know what their aggressive plans are. It's important for you all to read these memos. The hyperlinks are on the screen in front of you, both the Connecticut memo and the national memo.
So, tell me what's happened since the election.
So since we were planning effectively ahead of it, we were ready to spring into action immediately. The week of the election, we already started meeting with legislators, the governor's office, the attorney general's office, and leaders through what we call our Firewalls for Freedom initiative. And that's one to really make sure that civil rights and civil liberties are at the forefront and that the state is proactive in keeping Connecticut residents safe from this hostile federal government that is going to be coming in a month or so. We've engaged leadership and shared lots and lots of proposals that are things that can be done proactively and immediately to safeguard, as well as things that can be done when we see Trump's plan unfold. These are safeguards around things like immigrants' rights, protecting sensitive data that may be misused by the federal government to attack vulnerable communities. We've also highlighted to our elected officials the need to strengthen and protect things like reproductive health care and gender affirming health care. Our litigation team is working on litigation strategies, and our comms team, you included, B, are doing amazing work on public education campaigns to make sure people know what their rights are here and what's at stake and how to defend them if they are violated. We're also working in coalition with lots of partners across the state, like Equality Connecticut, Planned Parenthood, the NAACP, and Connecticut Students for a Dream, just to name a few. And we really need you. The purpose of these town halls is not to fear monger. It's meant to put on the board what the real threats are, get people mobilized, and make sure that we're ready to collectively build power and build public pressure to make sure that elected officials do what they need to do to keep us safe.
Well, thank you, David. That does give me hope, hearing that there's a plan and that the people here and supporters all around the state are committed to our cause. I want to get into the specific issues now. I want to start with abortion and reproductive justice. Those have been at the top of everyone's mind, and I want to address Connecticut rights specifically. Our policy director, Chelsea Infinity Gonzalez, has deep expertise in this area. So, Chelsea Infinity, can you tell us about what the ACLU is doing to keep reproductive freedom safe and promote reproductive justice in Connecticut?
Absolutely, B. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Infinity. I'm really glad to see you all here. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm also the director, as B said, of public policy and advocacy at the ACLU, excuse me, of Connecticut. Can sometimes be a mouthful. Our department at the ACLU, we drive to work policy change. We work to drive policy change through advocacy and organizing, always keeping our focus on the values that be named at the beginning of our session. And with regard to, reproductive justice in particular, we know that abortion rights and reproductive freedom are under attack in this country. It's not new, it's been going on for years. And we can certainly expect more Supreme Court cases and regressive policies coming out of federal and state governments. It's just a known fact. In Connecticut specifically, though, I really want to be clear in that it's safe and legal to access an abortion right now. And that's really important. If you don't remember anything else, please remember that. But it will likely stay safe and legal to get an abortion in Connecticut. That being said, we do anticipate the scope of practice getting a lot more difficult for providers, and we're actively monitoring that. We also are, active partners with folks like Repro Equity Now in Connecticut, as well as Massachusetts, as law firms, and our Attorney General to open abortion hotlines in both Massachusetts and Connecticut so that people in our region, including providers, can understand their legal rights. And the number that is also on the screen, we really want to encourage folks to save on your phones. That is the number to that hotline. We also know that people all over the country understand that reproductive health care is healthcare, full stop, period, right? And we know that people voted in mass to maintain the ability of women and people to access that care. And I think it's important to name that. Healthcare data privacy as well has already been really difficult nationwide as an issue, and it's going to be more difficult to maintain safely. And so we again are mindful of that. In our Firewall for Freedom work, we have provided the executive and the legislative branch with examples of guidance, recommendations, draft policy, all the things for increased protection of your healthcare data. That is really, really important to us. Key legislators and the governor's office have already, looked at this information. They have all of the things from our office. And we're going to continue to keep that line of communication open. We're going to continue to message them, key committees, and the public about this. That transparency is really important. And we know that extremist groups also already have the ability to purchase this healthcare data. And so that is another reason why we are applying pressure in hopes that Connecticut will reinforce shield laws that we have and create more safeguards to make it even more difficult for a hostile federal government like the one that we will have soon to get their hands on your information. So
a legal rights hotline is amazing, and I do hope everyone saves this number in their phone. And the data privacy work is a really great initiative. So what else are we doing to protect and advance reproductive justice?
Yeah, absolutely. In our Firewalls for Freedom work, we're asking specifically for the use of state funds to fund abortion and reproductive health care. And reproductive health care, without a doubt, includes gender affirming care. And we really want to name and acknowledge that. We've not made the specific ask at this time because the legislature is not in session right now. And we need to also take the temperature of our lawmakers in these next several weeks. But that's something that we have for sure included in our hundreds of pages of guidance that we've made sure the executive and legislative branch have. And then we also additionally have a comprehensive ballot measure that we're working on with Planned Parenthood, Equality Connecticut, Repro Equity Now, and other community partners that are really, really active in this work and have been for some time to advance a ballot initiative to enshrine the right to abortion, reproductive freedom, and gender affirming care. Again, you can't talk about one issue without talking about the others because they are so interconnected. And we are unclear on the legislative support to include gender affirming care at this moment, but that to us is without a doubt a tier 1 priority. And public support there is going to be really, really crucial in that area.
This is fantastic. This is great work. So because we're talking about gender affirming care, I want to talk to our legal director, Dan Barrett, about LGBTQIA rights in general, and especially attacks on transgender people specifically. What do we know, Dan, and what can we do?
Well, hi, I'm Dan Barrett, and I'm your legal director here at the ACLU of Connecticut. I use he, him pronouns. What I can tell you, B, is that we're looking at a very hostile federal government that's going to be absolutely full of roadblocks and hatred for civil rights and civil liberties issues, especially on LGBTQIA plus and transgender rights. We know that on day one, for example, the government in Washington is going to stomp on Connecticut education law, which has for decades mandated equal participation in school extracurricular activities. And That has worked fine here in Connecticut, but Washington, D.C. is going to say otherwise and mandate that our schools discriminate against transgender kids. That's a small piece of the worrisome and alarming hostility that we're going to see coming from the incoming government. But here in Connecticut, what we're going to do is to make sure that our existing protections, to the maximum extent possible, remain in place and that our community is safe and that transgender people here have the right to full and equal participation in our society. That means everything, including proper medical care. And this is not something that should be a talking point for politicians. This is not a matter of debate. It's a material need for human dignity. So we will be here defending what we already have in law. We will be defending it against the hostile government to the maximum extent we can, and we're going to be fighting. Our Firewall for Freedom work that Chelsea Infinity mentioned includes some guidance on about half a dozen kind of easily made policy changes to kind of beef up our existing state statutes and make sure that the rights that we have here stay strong and are in some cases portable for when people hit the road and travel. But we are going to fight B for those freedoms.
Well, that gives me some hope. That's very specific and I love the plan. So now I want to go to the issue of the day, which is immigration and potential mass deportations. Dan, can you tell us what's going to happen? And then maybe after Dan, Chelsea Infinity, can you tell us what the ACLU is doing about this?
Yeah, I think that we ought to, as David said, take the incoming Trump government at its word and expect human suffering and so-called shock and awe on day one and beyond. People need to, as awful as it sounds, kind of be ready for a series of really reprehensible actions by the national government and not be paralyzed by fear, but understand that here in Connecticut, we're going to band together, we're going to stay together, we're going to fight to make sure that the people who are part of our community remain that way. One of the things that we've been talking about here at the office is the concept of writing down your values, what you will and won't put up with, and then sticking with them. Because part of the agenda that is about to be unveiled will involve an almost daily parade of deprivations and actions that on their own would probably shock you. And what we want to make sure is that Connecticut residents and lawmakers don't become inured to them and sort of accept this cavalcade of really awful stuff. So we are preparing for what the Trump camp has promised, which is mass deportations. But at the same time, we know that those deportations will cripple our economy. And so we suspect that we will be seeing smaller symbolic raids here in Connecticut that may stretch across the state. But we are ready to enforce our state law that prohibits certain kinds of coordination and support by our state and local police to ICE. Effectively, under Connecticut law, ICE is on its own. If it wants to round people up, it has to do it on its own. Our state and local police cannot hold people for ICE. We'll be there to enforce that where we can. We also have been thinking about strategies if the federal government should deploy the National Guard. But all of these things, are one thing legally, but they rest ultimately on public pressure and public protest. Moods change, governments change, as we saw even in the last 24 hours in South Korea, right? By people going into the streets. And so it is time to get ready for action and to make your voices heard to your elected officials. And I think Chelsea Infinity might tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks so much for that context, Dan. It very much is giving when people show you who they are, you believe them. And everything that we are anticipating very much is a testament to why we are going to be asking you all to take to the streets with us, with other organizations like Connecticut Students for a Dream that, who have been doing all of the work and then some, right, to protect immigrant communities. We hope that this is something that you will join us for, and the coalition of advocates all over the state in this fight. This is what we mean, quite literally, when we say that we must stand up for one another, and when we talk about community care. In our Firewalls for Freedom work that we've been talking a little bit about, we've provided further guidance and recommendations to the executive and legislative branches, such as draft guidance for state employees to refuse cooperation with ICE. We'll continue to demand and advise full-scale non-cooperation and enhance the strength of these protections. We're also galvanizing work with mayors and other organizations as well on shielding measures. And we're going to update, you all on this when we have more to publicly share, but want to be transparent and level set there. And then additionally, we're also members of a coalition of organizations led by Connecticut Students for a Dream. Civil society means non-governmental groups of people who care about an issue are willing to show up for one another, right? Like that's what it's about. And so we're really proud to work alongside our partners, to work with Connecticut Students for a Dream. And we hope that you all will also, work in coalition with us too. We're calling for amendments to and strengthening of the Trust Act specifically as well to ensure that it prevents any material support for ICE and so that it can be enforced in court, which I'm sure, Dan can add some spice there about that need. But we've already participated in a lot of different public demonstrations about this, and we're going to continue to beat the drum with our coalition partners until there's more protections for immigrants and migrants in Connecticut, until the Trust Act is, even more secure and we can take it beyond, in addition to all of the other things that, Dan named, and that we're doing on the policy front. So.
Yeah, I know that the strengthening the Trust Act is a huge thing and a thing that will take public support and public pressure. We do know that, governments and legislators respond to public pressure. So we will need public action and the strengthening of this Trust Act. And there are some lawsuits, it sounds like, that we can bring if state or local police cooperate at all with ICE. And then what about data privacy and government surveillance? Dan?
Sure. So we've been doing some work in preparation for what's coming in January with helping give some guidance to executive branch officials about ways that state employees can avoid sharing information. We are also really on the lookout because I think one of the things implicated by your question, B, is the right to express yourself, because surveillance is antithetical to that. We don't want people, whether it's under a Trump government or any other, to feel as if they cannot express themselves. They can't go to the Capitol, they can't go to their city hall and make their views known for fear that they will be, on video forever or they will be somehow profiled. And so we are going to help the executive branch figure out how to avoid that, but we are also going to litigate where we can. And we're going to make sure that the public knows about the systems that are in place and will come online over the next 4 years, because what we want to make sure you have is all of the information that you need and the ability to participate in our democratic society.
So tell me, that's a good segue. So I also want to mention before we move on, there are Know Your Rights guides in English and in Spanish on the front page of our website. And we hope that you will avail yourself of those. So Dan, I have one more question for you. What about like the most classic ACLU issue of all, the First Amendment? What can we expect to see in a second Trump administration? I know this is a deep expertise of just about everyone on staff, but you specifically as well. So tell us about what we can see and perhaps where we can go from there.
Sure, both our state constitution and the national constitution protect our right to express ourselves, whether that's protest or art or anything else. So I want to make sure everybody knows you have the right to protest. And what we want to make sure is that you can exercise that right if you feel that you want to, whether that's on a big or small scale. You've got the right to freedom of speech. You've got the right to do that in a variety of settings. And the next 4 years are going to require us to do that as a group. So we have Know Your Rights guides up on our website for protesting, for marching. We are also out here continuing the work that we've been doing over the last few years to make sure that we, the people, can observe the government, publicize what the government is up to, especially the police, and protest what the government is doing. And so, for example, we recently at the trial court level won most of a case called Friend v. Gasparino, which involved a person who was publicizing what the police were up to. That kind of litigation, those kinds of rulings are going to be really important as we go into a period in which a national government has promised that it is going to retaliate against speech. Fortunately, we have very strong protections and we'll be on guard. I think I should also mention 2 other topics, B, which are censorship and compelled speech. And they're kind of flip side, 2 sides of the same coin. We suspect that the national government will begin conditioning federal funding in a variety of areas on public institutions in Connecticut either saying certain things or refusing to say certain things. For example, there has been talk of so-called patriotic education mandates in federal education funding that would require schools to teach some kind of inverted version of American history. There may also be gags in that funding so that schools cannot frankly discuss the actual history of our country, how we came to be, and on whose backs we were built. There may also be conditions attached to sexual and reproductive health. So we are going to be on guard for those. We're going to be ready to litigate those, and we're going to be ready to try to convince our elected officials that in certain circumstances, they ought not to sign up for any money that has such conditions attached. But we are ready to make sure that everyone can express themselves either in the streets, at the ballot box, or in any other place.
That's very heartening to hear, especially for a comms person whose job it is to speak freely. So I'm glad to hear that we can exercise our First Amendment rights and that the ACLU is encouraging people to do so, and especially in a format that holds government officials and police accountable. So this seems like a very important standard to set right now before we move into the second Trump administration. And I will put a short plug in for the comms department has a call for art for free expression. It is on our website. You can go to ACLU-CT.org to the events page, and you will see our call for free expression. Send us your poems, your literature, your music, your art, and we will post them on our website starting January 1st. So if you happen to feel that your freedom of expression is being chilled, at the very least, you will have a piece of art on your ACLU website. And that is not much, but it is not nothing, and very important. So before I see some questions in the Q&A, so I want to get to those very quickly. But right before I do, David, can you tell us, we presented our plans for sort of what we're doing in the second Trump administration, but can you tell us a little bit about and tell everyone about our proactive work, and then we'll go into questions.
Absolutely, B. For us here in Connecticut, it's a balance. We have a team of 17, and our team is incredibly powerful, dedicated, smart, and focused. I've been at the ACLU almost 18 years, and I can tell you this team is ready for the moment. To put it in perspective, back in 2016, when Trump was elected the first time, we had a team of 6, and we were mighty, but we were very, very small and largely reactive at that point, just because of our size and the nature of things. We are ready to meet this moment with clarity, and we have a strategy. That also includes making room for our proactive work. We do have to hold the line. And like Dan and Chelsea Infinity put so eloquently, there are lots of threats coming our way that we need to be central to heading off and working with partners on. But we also need to continue to push for expanded rights here in Connecticut. Our team has done a lot of work, and virtually all of our work here at the ACLU of Connecticut is work that takes multiple years to accomplish. We're working on big legal change, policy change, and there's an arc of this work that we really can't let up on. One of the areas that we've done a lot of work recently is voting rights. We've tried to make Connecticut take it out of the dark ages and make it a leader in terms of voting access. So if you remember back a few years ago, we fought very hard for early voting. Our legislative team did an amazing job last year and got that implemented, and that was very successful this last session. Our RISE PAC, which is our nonpartisan issue-based PAC, did tremendous work in the summer and fall of this year and helped with the coalition partners get no excuse absentee voting across the line. Chelsea Infinity and her team will be pushing very hard to make the legislature take that up this year and pass the most robust and broad form of no excuse absentee voting to make sure people can vote easily. We also saw some limited issues here in Connecticut be with voting ballots and maybe some complicated or incorrect advice from people at the polls on the ballots. We need a very strong ballot curing process. We'll also be working very hard on that. In the criminal legal system, which is another calling card of our organization, we'll be working very hard to build on a success that Dan and his team had around ending prison debt. Here in Connecticut, we have a really disgusting practice of charging people for their time in our correctional facility. And the Department of Correction and Administrative Services are really awful about trying to claw back money from people who are just trying to get their legs under them and move on with their lives. Dan and his team got a win recently where 3 of our clients had their debts erased entirely, which is great, but there's still a need for larger change. We'll be working on that. Chelsea Infinity and her team will be doing a lot of work around cash bail. Our state has some really huge disparities in folks that are impacted by our pretrial bail system. So we are working with legislators and allies to try to find some more equitable alternatives to our cash bail system. That is long-term work that we will continue to push forward on this year. Another topic that you may have seen on our website, but also seen in the news, is AI. We are working with legislators to make sure that any AI legislation that moves here in Connecticut is sound and protects against bias in AI. This is an area that is definitely emerging and large, intersects with a lot of our other work, and will be showing up in that space. And then finally, like Chelsea Infinity mentioned, we will be working with partners on the Trust Act, which again is that law that curbs the ability for local law enforcement or the Department of Corrections to work with and do the work of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. It's absolutely clear that we need to update that, make it stronger, and make it enforceable to make sure that if police departments do violate it, there's a real consequence for that. The final thing I'll name, which is not a subject matter necessarily, is being a hub for information. As B said, we are a credible source of information. We have amazing lawyers on our team. So we'll be pushing out lots of know your rights guides, videos, and material to make sure that people understand their rights and what's at stake.
Thank you, David. So we're doing a lot for a potential
Sure.
Trump administration or and otherwise, right? So we know this, but we are here today to remind everyone here that you all have a vital role to play in the world that we are making in Connecticut and throughout the country. So we are getting more questions by the minute. So let me do one quick thing, and then we will get to questions. I want to make sure that you understand how you specifically can help. First, we are here to build collective power by being a part of civil society. This means writing and calling and pressuring your representatives. This actually works. People don't think it works. It works. They have to log down how many people call on whatever issue. And what we saw recently on a national scale with the House Resolution 9495, we saw legislators who even had political prisoners in their districts change their vote after people sounded the alarm on the negative effects it would have for organizations like the ACLU, or could potentially have in a Trump administration. So also this means showing up to rallies and protests when asked, which Chelsea Infinity and Dan have done a great job of galvanizing me. I think everyone else in the room too. But this means to show up events like this and get information. And you can be counted as a part of the resistance by coming here, learning something, and helping to disseminate that information or show people where they can get good and accurate reality-based information. And your ACLU is a place that you will be able to do that, especially about civil rights and liberties. Again, write down your values, what you will and won't put up with, and hold your community accountable for those values, yourself and your community. We do this as a practice informally in our office. I do this with my friends and family as well. History shows that regular people can be lulled into complacency and complying with like terrible policies and governmental actions because societal norms will change and people get exhausted. So if you know exactly what you will and won't put up with and know what your values are and lead with those values, the actions that you take will be part and parcel of that. And we hope to show that we do that in our work as well at the ACLU. Get to know one key issue or issue area that you care about, or one group. The ACLU is a great group to follow closely because we lift up our community partners all over the state and nationally, and we specialize in several different issue areas that you are able to follow along with us if you stay informed. If it's not us, choose a group or choose an issue area and know everything about that in Connecticut so that you feel like you have control and power over one piece of your world and the world that we're making together. So stay engaged, stay informed, and support ourselves and our partner organizations. Make sure that you access those Know Your Rights guides. They're right there on our website on the front page. And we hope you will become a member. We are about 10,000 strong in Connecticut, and we have more than 1 million members nationwide. This is by far the best way to showcase that you care about civil rights and liberties. Your name, you are a card-carrying member of the ACLU. That is a very valuable thing to be in times like these. And this is a reminder that we take nonpartisan stances on constitutional issues and the rule of law. So go to our website. You can sign up. This is not about your money. You don't have to give a certain amount to be a member. This is much more about showcasing that you you and the people that you care about and the world that you care about. We are all together, and that we are sort of beating the drum for civil rights and liberties. That being said, we are funded by donations, and joining as a member or giving a significant recurring gift as part of our Impact Society can actually alter the scope of what we're able to do with civil rights and liberties in Connecticut and nationwide. So please consider a gift that's meaningful to you. With that, we will go to our questions. I have several questions. We do have some guidelines. Thank you. So please be respectful. And so far the questions look good, but please be respectful, and we can't answer like specific legal questions. I have several questions on DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion measures. And so what I can say is I know that Project 2025 has promised to sort of decimate those conversations and practices in employment scenarios, and bills like the Florida Stop Woke Act sort of sends these signals of chilling discussions around racial and gender equity and inclusion in employment and schools and other spaces. Maybe Chelsea Infinity, could you tell us maybe what the ACLU is doing about DEI? And then I also have some questions about immigration.
Yeah, thanks, Bea. So as you said, right, Trump and his supporters have really leveraged last year's Supreme Court decision on affirmative action in particular to undermine and create confusion around DEI initiatives, which is really problematic. DEI and affirmative action are two very different issues, so the math just isn't mathing there. The incoming administration is expected, again, as you said, to roll back vital civil rights protections, dismantle all the DEI policies in both public and private sectors, and institutionalize this worldview that's rooted in white supremacy and anti-Black racism. And for us, it's really, really important that we continue to defend efforts to counteract historical discrimination and unequal access to opportunities. We know that the plans to intensify efforts to eradicate DEI programming and inclusive education, banning of books, censoring, curricula on race, gender, and all of the lived experiences and contributions of historically undervalued groups in classrooms are a very real concern. For us, it's important to name that this is a First Amendment issue as much as it is a civil rights issue. And that very much, makes it something, that we are keeping tabs on and that we believe is incredibly important. Trump, his supporters, folks have made it clear that they are proposing to control what we think and learn by using the government to censor a viewpoint that they don't like and just eradicate it from existence. And again, if that's not concerning to you, it should be for several reasons. Luckily for us, we stand ready. We stay ready so we don't have to get ready, okay? We're prepared to fight back. We put out this Connecticut memo that several of the members of our team have mentioned, this Connecticut memo several weeks ago, and this really, really details our roadmap in the courts, in the legislature, and in our people power, right? Organizing and what advocacy looks like as well, and the ways that those two things are interconnected. We need people like you, our attendees, right, to attend Board of Education meetings, right? Stay aware who's on your board, who do I need to have a relationship with, attending those meetings, what are they talking about, right? Making sure that you keep up to date and in the loop, stay in the loop on all of those updates. Pressure your legislators and let the advocacy community know that when DEI comes under attack, in Connecticut specifically, as a result of all of the things that Trump has planned, that we're ready to combat that collectively. The ACLU filed more than 430 legal actions against the first Trump administration, and a lot of that included lawsuits against anti-DEI policies. So I want to name that because again, from fair housing to book bans, we are going to continue to use the courts strategically to combat these discriminatory tactics, including DEI specifically, or efforts to roll back DEI. And then we're also, planning to push Congress to consistently vote against anti-DEI bills and efforts to strip federal funding from such programs, and to amplify through hearings, through public statements, how all of these programs work and the reasons why we need them, why they are critical. And we're going to work, continuously to protect and advance civil rights protections in the public sector, and also defend inclusive curricula at the K through 12 level. We've already provided critical guidance, to lawmakers, to legislators, all of the key stakeholders that we should be in contact with. And we are going to continue to provide support to institutions and to school districts in Connecticut specifically, in Connecticut and beyond, right, to combat historical discrimination that's still constitutionally, even though there's some aggressive messaging to the contrary. So want to name that. Yeah, I'll stop there.
We have several. I'm going to move on to thank you, Chelsea Infinity. That gives us a good scope nationally and in Connecticut. It's very, very helpful. Seems a big concern for several of our questioners today. So another thing I'm seeing all over the question and answer is this is anxiety about I am very anxious about the promises of mass deportation starting day one. Can we talk more about the immigration piece? And then also, what should an undocumented person in Connecticut do if they're stopped, like by ICE or by law enforcement? Dan, can you maybe help us out with that one, I think?
Sure. For that second part, if you're stopped by law enforcement and you're undocumented, or you have any concerns at all about your status, the thing to remember is that every stop is the same. You always have the ability to politely decline to speak with either local police, state police, or ICE. You can remain silent. This is your famous right to remain silent. You can ask if you're being detained and just say, I don't want to talk to you right now, and I'd like to leave. The only wrinkle is that with ICE, now local police and state police shouldn't be asking for any immigration proof, papers, none of that. They have no business in enforcing immigration, and they don't know what they're looking at, frankly. If ICE stops you and they ask you for documentation, like your passport or something like that, and you have it on you, you must furnish it to them. If you don't have it on you, obviously you don't. But don't lie when it comes to the police or ICE. Don't tell them something that isn't true. Just insist politely on your right to remain silent. You just would rather not speak with them. So that's the kind of contours of being stopped. It's a lot like the advice we give out in any other phase of dealing with the police, except that if it's ICE specifically and you have your passport on you and they ask to see it, you have to furnish it to them. Other than that, it's the same as interacting with police generally.
That is very helpful. Thank you. We have several questions about Dan. I think I'm going to stay with you for a minute. Can we talk a little bit about Scrimeti? I have a couple of questions. First is for the folks who don't know, the ACLU argued at the Supreme Court today in the Scrimeti case in favor of gender affirming care for transgender minors. And the first openly transgender lawyer to argue at the Supreme Court, Chase Strangio, is one of the ACLU's lawyers and made that oral argument today. So I have a question about, where did it go? I have a question about there it is. It appears that the ban on gender affirming care will be upheld. What is not as clear is whether accessibility to gender affirming care will be left up to the states. So can we get thoughts on this? And then also, as another part of that question, we had another transgender question. What can a person do to support their LGBTQ QIA child?
So on Scrimeti, the question of whether care is left up to the states, the question in Scrimeti is not whether states should be in charge of legislating the parameters of medical care within their borders. The question is whether states may single out transgender people for specific prohibitions against accepted medical care. And so the question, even after Scrimeti is decided, no matter which way it goes, will remain in the hands of the states, but subject to certain floors in both state and federal law. In Scrimeti, the question is the Equal Protection Clause. So whether a government may make distinctions between people based on a foundational attribute. So no matter which way Scrimeti goes, for example, our government here in Connecticut will continue to be constrained by both the National Equal Protection Clause and also our anti-discrimination statutes and our Equal Protection Clause equivalent in our state constitution. So there will remain guardrails around what each state can do and how it can, if at all, restrict medical practice. Of course, there's a constellation of other law bearing on the states kind of tinkering with medical practice that's outside of anti-discrimination and outside equal protection, but those questions will remain.
And then what about for a person who is worried about forcing revision to genders labeled at birth in the Social Security database? And also, how can a family, we call in my family, we call them rainbow families. How can a rainbow family support like their trans or queer child?
So as to like the sort of federal usage of gender markers or names, in many cases, the federal government looks down to the states to establish such things. For example, in Connecticut, your name is set by the state. If I wanted to get a name change tomorrow, that's the product of a Connecticut court decree. The probate court will issue that decree. And so if the feds were to depart from that, that raises some serious questions about what we call comity, that is to say, how the federal COMITY, how the federal government treats the states, and also some practical questions. We, of course, don't want any government, federal or state, to be in charge of deciding what, kind of what people's gender is, if it's contrary to what people believe their gender is. And so I think that there will be a number of opportunities should that happen for litigation, perhaps both at the state and the federal level. I deal in the kind of clinical world of the law, so I'm not necessarily the best person to ask about supporting your child. I do, though, as the parent of a young child, what Chelsea Infinity said really resonated with me, which is participating in and paying attention to the institutions that are important to your child as they progress. And so, for example, being active in your daycare, being active in your PTO, paying attention to what your school does, and making sure, as we talked about earlier, that your elected officials know that these issues are important to you and why. My sense from living in Connecticut is that it's a rare occasion when an elected official gets a call about anything, let alone 2 or 3 calls. And so I think it's also rare that constituents reach out outside of a crisis. And I think it can be helpful to talk with your city councilor, with your rep, with your state senator, and just say, hey, thought I would introduce myself. I want to make sure that you know that transgender rights are really important to me as a parent because of my child. And I hope that you will pay attention to the following things. I think that's important in Connecticut because our public policy and our law, through the things that our General Assembly has done, firmly supports the equal participation and dignity of transgender people here. And it's worth saying, Senator, I just want you to keep a lookout. Just keep what we have. Make sure that we don't go a millimeter backwards. And I think that can help. Other than that, beyond participating in those institutions and making sure that our interests are seen, I don't quite know what to suggest.
I think that's a great answer. So I have, oh, go ahead, Chelsea Infinity.
No, thanks. I was also going to add, staying in the loop is really important, right? I am part of the queer community. I've been with my partner for years. I envision a world where my queer child feels loved, safe, supported in all spaces, public and private, right? That's the future that I envision for my child and children and similarly situated, right? And in my mind, it's important to me, because self-care includes community care, that they have access to community beyond maybe what I can provide for them. And so in addition to keeping, staying up to date on not only what's going on in your child's lives, right? And, whether that be personally, professionally, educationally, right? All of the things. It also looks like beyond my family, right? What actions can I take, right? Which is what we've been talking about here today. What actions can I take to protect and advance the rights of queer youth in particular, whether that's through contacting local representatives, whether that's through, some of the coalition work we've been talking about, being active in those spaces, participating in protests or rallies, right? Granted, safety is subjective, and maybe it doesn't feel safe for you or your family to do that. And I want to name and honor that, but how are we actively, collectively working to create a more inclusive world that we want to see for our kids? So it's beyond, right, the silo, the bubble of my family, my child, and what is happening on that level. And additionally, just emphasizing community, right? We know that there's going to be a lot of these attacks. We know that some of these things may impact us in Connecticut, potentially, right, may trickle down into facets of our lives in Connecticut that, are really concerning and scary. And we can't prepare for everything. We can't anticipate everything. But if and when that happens, it's community that we want to lean into. It's community that your child is going to need, especially if you can't relate being a part of that community as well, right? If someone outside of the queer community was to be like, I feel you, I'd be like, you don't, right? So like naming that is okay, but how are we ensuring that our our children feel supported, that they have, other peers that they can talk to in person, online, that they have people they can go to for resources, for advice. That feeling of solidarity, that feeling of being seen and heard in ways that maybe, not even your own family does sometimes, right? It's different. So I think just being mindful of support to a young person, a young queer person especially, may look different than support as a queer adult, right? And there's a lot of layers there, but it's just really important to name that. And then the last thing I really just want to say is we talked a lot about DEI attacks and things of that nature. And I mean, teach your child about the history of queer rights and movements at home as well. And if you don't feel comfortable enough, or you don't feel well versed enough or educated enough on the issue, Google is free, first and foremost, but also, right, like take those steps to educate yourself, right? So that you can then teach your child about that in a way that resonates with them, and they can understand that they're part of a long tradition of fighting for equity, of, being loud and being proud and being in community with each other. That community care is a part of self-care, and vice versa. And I think that really will give young queer children strength and pride in their identity in ways that I wish I, had. And so I just want to name that. Stay informed, stay vigilant, educate and empower yourself and your kids, and ensure that folks have access to support networks, and that you're advocating for the rights of everyone's queer children.
So we've had some folks in the Q&A add in, joining the Out Accountability Project's Parent, Caregiver, and Ally Action Network is a great way to support your queer children. I work with and our development directors on the board of Equality Connecticut, which is a great resource and a great connector of all of the queer advocacy community in Connecticut. And also we had someone add PFLAG, Parents and Friends. I think it's Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays is the historic name. But they have pflag.org/find a chapter. I know that the PFLAG group in Enfield, where there had been some anti-LGBTQ rhetoric months prior to the election, had done some really great work up there. So there are lots of places that allyship and advocacy is needed. Okay, we have 5 minutes left, so I'd like to do some rapid fire questions. We did not plan for this, so we'll see how it goes. Sorry, guys. David, do you recommend that Connecticut residents carry their passports with them?
That's a great question. I mean, like Dan said, in terms of if you're thinking in the immigration context, if you are carrying your papers, you have to show them to a ICE official. Again, law enforcement is very different. Like Dan said, they should never be asking for that. From a perspective of someone that does not have a complicated immigration status, that's probably not necessary. But it is important that folks, especially with complicated immigration backgrounds, understand what they have to do if they're stopped by an immigration official in particular.
Great. So how about we'll stay with you, David, on this one. Trump is talking about going after political enemies, activists, and leftists. What are your thoughts, and what do we do for legal representation if arrested for activism or political views? Also, so if arrested, what do we do? We also have a question of folks that are worried that they post about these things and talk about these things openly, and they know that Trump is building like an enemies list, right? And like, if should they be afraid? My answer for that one is this is why we're doing the free expression campaign at ACLU, is because if you get scared, you know that the American Civil Liberties Union, like your art is on their website. If you are a card carrying member, you are these things. This is why showing up to things like this, joining the resistance, and being part of civil society. That's why we keep talking about this is really important. And making sure that you're a part of a network. There's nothing to do if you've been a long time civil rights and liberties supporter. There's no need to be afraid of these people. That's what they want, right? They want you to be afraid. But if you are worried about speech and feel a chilling effect on your ability to express yourself freely, I would consider doubling down on your advocacy and your support of and including yourself in some of these groups like the ACLU. So then, David, what
You
happens
just,
if someone is arrested?
yeah, I mean, you just answered the first question. It's really a personal decision how you show up and resist in this space. I mean, a lot of it is very much dictated by personal needs and security. But at the end of the day, Dan is exactly right. You have very well established constitutional rights under the federal and Connecticut constitutions. In terms of if you're targeted, that's the kind of thing you should reach out to us for. To be real, we have a legal team of 4, so we have only so much capacity, but we work with a network of lawyers, and you should feel free to reach out to us. Our intake page is on our website.
Yes, yes, intake at acluct.org for that. How about Dan? Is it how constitutionally possible is it for Trump to declare a national emergency to deport immigrants on day one? We have a couple of people that are wondering if this is just fear mongering, and sort of what that picture looks like.
So the answer to any legal question, I think the right answer to any legal question is the one that nobody ever wants to hear, which is it depends. I think, picking up on some of the things that we've talked about, that Trump is going to be in completely uncharted territory, structurally, and in every other way. So I can't accurately predict what mechanism he will invoke to try to do the things he wants to do, from big to small. I think we're just going to see a range of things that are going to stretch the courts. What if he fires the entire Securities and Exchange Commission tomorrow, even though he can't do that, right? I think it's going to be a constant parade of people observing he can't really do that. So the thing that we are focused on is not only the structural constraints. You know that we are going to be there to litigate overstepping of his Article 1 authority, but it's also practical and due process constraints. So we have for a very long time been a leader on immigration across the country, and particularly on insisting on due process, and not just for the sake of, a show, not just for the sake of paperwork, but making sure that people have an adequate chance to vindicate their interest in being in the United States, whether that's raising a claim that they are entitled to be here for a particular reason, such as they've been tortured, they've been subjected to something in their home country, or any other. And so what I think you will see us doing, in addition to everything else about the kind of structure of whether a president can do this, is insisting that everybody gets their day in court. You don't just get rounded up and hustled out of the country. We have a system for determining whether or not you're allowed to be here, at least according to the rules that are on the books. So there are a number of ways in which you will see us combating this. Stay tuned.
And last question, Chelsea Infinity, and then we will wrap up. Before we get to our last question, please use the QR code to tell us how this town hall was. We're doing like a dozen of these all over the state. This is our only virtual one. So this is our one chance to hear from you all. We've already gotten some notes that people want to sell the "We Are With You in This Fight" ACLU of Connecticut shirts. So we may have to do that. But the last question, Chelsea Infinity, we have several folks that are still worried about what is possible for reproductive and gender affirming care in the state. I want to remind people of the legal abortion hotline that we are a part of, and the Know Your Rights to Abortion guides that are on our website. What is like maybe 2 to 3 other things that the ACLU of Connecticut is doing to support reproductive justice and gender affirming care today? And that'll close us out.
Forgot I was muted for a second. No, I appreciate you naming that. Yeah, we really are just monitoring things that might, trickle down and impact us in Connecticut federally. So I think just keeping lines of communication open with folks that we need to be communicating with, keeping tabs on things happening federally that may impact us in the state. Even though we are a blue state and we do have a lot of existing protections here, there still may be room for that to change, especially with such a hostile administration. And we are trying to be intentional about strengthening our shield laws. If it's a lot of folks, we've done, ACLU has done constitutional amendments and ballot initiatives in several states, and really trying to think strategically if that's something that makes sense for Connecticut, right? What will make sense for us here? So I think for us, it's really important that we are legislatively thinking creatively about how we can protect and expand rights that maybe aren't threatened now, but likely will be in the near future.
Great. Thank you so much. If your question was not answered, there's a few of them. Please send it to info@acluct.org. You can DM us on social media. And other than that, sign up for our action alerts right on our front of our webpage. Please become a member. And thank you all so much for being part of the resistance, for showing up today, and for supporting the American Civil Liberties Union of Connecticut. Thank you all.